guys, Mr. Klein here with our first lesson in our new chapter on the Roman Empire. It's a chapter that will consist of two lessons. The first one on the collapse of the Roman Republic and Pax Romana, that's this lesson. And the next lesson will be on the fall of the Roman Empire and the Roman legacy in terms of the Byzantine Empire. So let's go ahead and get started. At the end of our last chapter, the Roman Republic was in trouble. Spartacus had led a revolt of slaves that had been put down. Men had been crucified along the Appian Way, the road on the way to Rome. But the Roman government was in trouble. The Roman Republic, if you remember, was a three-branch government. You had the consuls, who were the executives. You had the Senate, which is a legislative. And you had a second legislative branch of plebeians or common citizens there. The problem was that during this time of about 100 years BC, that the consuls began gaining too much power. And if you remember from my lesson talking about the Roman government, I said that governments with checks and balances only work when all three branches are kept equal. And they're designed like that in order to keep the branches equal, because if one gets too much power, the whole thing falls apart. And the Roman Republic's fall and the creation of the Roman Empire is a great example of why separation of powers and checks and balances need to be kept together for government. After Spartacus's revolt in the early 80s BC, a famous speaker, general, and writer by the name of Cicero asked Romans to restore the balance of political power to the Senate. He was a senator, he was a consul even at one time, and he said that, you know what, let's give power back to the Senate instead of the powers being taken by consuls over and over becoming dictators. And Rome was kind of at a turning point at this point in time. It was about to fall in the Civil War. Consuls were constantly killing each other, and there was a lot of violence, and Rome was at stake. The entire republic, which at this time was actually this big. All of this in yellow belonged to Rome. And in stepped in three guys, which called themselves the triumvirate, or the group of three. And before, you had Crassus, which was a rich general, and it was a consul, who did not like Pompey, who was a politician in general, and these two guys fought over becoming consul. And in stepped in a third gentleman, and this is kind of the gentleman that most people blame for the fall of the Republic, but he's just one of the most famous people in history. I'll leave the blame over falling the Republic to you to figure out. And that was Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a general, and by the way, here's a picture right here of Cicero. Cicero, the speaker who said that the Roman Republic should be saved. But in walked in Julius Caesar, who got Pompey and Crassus together, who allowed him, as he was stationed out here, to march in the Gallia, or the Gauls, where the French people are. And he launched a brilliant military campaign that brought the barbarian tribes in the Roman rule, and even Julius Caesar actually invaded and took most of Great Britain for Roman rule. And through this series of famous victories, Julius Caesar ended up taking power and naming himself dictator. And this caused the triumvirate to fall apart all in this time, because what happened was, while Julius Caesar was off conquering all of Gaul and stuff, Crassus went off into the east and was killed. And all this time, Pompey had figured out that Julius Caesar was trying to make a name for himself and rule Rome for his own, setting Caesar and Pompey against each other. And a lot of times when there was Roman generals, they would leave their army by the Rubicon River, which was outside of Rome. And that's where we get the phrase crossing the Rubicon, because Pompey sent a note to Caesar telling him not to come back to Rome with his army. And Pompey did not want that to happen, because he knew it would start civil war. Caesar knew that, and instead he brought his army across the Rubicon, sparking the civil war. Caesar drives Pompey out. Pompey is eventually assassinated here in Egypt, and Julius Caesar is left in power. He names himself dictator, consolidates even more power in the consuls for himself. And the senators did not like this, and they ended up getting together and actually stabbing him to death. This is one of the famous things. Julius Caesar was stabbed in the Roman Senate, and Rome fell into civil war. On one side, you had Pompey, who I had talked about. He was deciding that Julius Caesar was too much. He needed to be killed in order to save the Republic. On the other side, there were two other guys. One was Mark Antony, and the other guy was a relative, rather, of Julius Caesar named Octavian. He was his grandnephew, but actually became adopted by Julius Caesar. Mark Antony, and who is this guy right here, along with Octavian, which is this guy right here, and we'll talk about him more in a second, banded together and chased Pompey and his men all the way to Egypt and caused the conquering of Egypt for the Romans and the fall of the final pharaoh, which was Cleopatra. However, once Pompey was killed, Octavian and Mark Antony squared off against each other because they realized that there was nobody really running Rome, and these two men were the two most powerful men in Rome. Mark Antony fought against Octavian, and eventually Octavian defeated him, emerged victorious, and Mark Antony was killed. Now, Octavian had a choice at this point. He could have given power back to the Senate, or he could consolidate power for himself. Instead, he decided to keep it for himself and named him Augustus and became Rome's first emperor. And so that's where we get this picture right here of Caesar. So Octavian became Augustus Caesar, or the exalted one, and became Rome's first emperor. Now, the thing to know about this, about the Roman government under Octavian and so on and so forth, was that actually the Senate never went away. You still had the three branches of government. You had the assemblies of the plebeians, you had the Senate, and you had the consul in the form of the emperor, but there was only one emperor anymore, and he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. The Senate could vote for laws and say, hey, Rome needed this, and Caesar, the emperor, could say, you know what, no, we don't need this, and he could veto it, and he could do whatever he wanted. And because Octavian took over, what happened was the Roman Empire, Octavian's rule and this crushing of all these civil wars and people trying to backstab each other led to a massive growth in the Roman Empire. And they filled out all of the Mediterranean, most of Northern Europe, and actually out toward the Persian Gulf. By AD 100, they ruled from Gaul, even into Britain, out to Turkey, and had empires and kingdoms under their control out here in Asia. And so this led to, this was during Octavian's rule, this area, all of this area right here, ended up being, including this area right here of Dacia and Britannia over here. Dacia is modern-day Romania, and Great Britain up here, led to Roman peace because the army, the Roman military, was so much in charge and stuff and kept invasions and stuff away that led to a 200-year time of peace and prosperity known as Pax Romana. And that's Latin for Roman peace. Now, the Roman peace was enforced through the army. The army was huge at this time, and whenever invaders or people would attempt to fight them, the Roman army would just crush them. And that's not to say that everything was nice and peaceful, because what happened, as we'll talk about in the next lesson, Roman emperors who ruled kept on killing each other through all sorts of crazy conspiracies and assassinations and things like that. But overall, it was a time of peace, leading to a lot of different achievements. So let's talk about the Roman achievements now before we talk about the fall and stuff in the next lesson. Because during the time of the Roman Empire, the Romans made advances in engineering and science. The Romans were considered the master engineers of the ancient world. They were very practical and very military based. So if something could help the army defeat an enemy, they would explore it even more. And the Romans, if you remember, what I said was they loved the Greeks. They loved any good idea that wasn't their own. They would steal it and make their own. And they were so in love with Greek ideas, and this had a major impact on Roman art and architecture. So let's look at these two things, some advancements. One are roads. Okay, a civilization can't be successful without easy transportation to allow goods and economic boom to go out. And over 2,000 years later, we still see examples of Roman roads right here. They're built remarkably like our own roads, with a foundation of packed dirt and gravel and cobblestones laid on top, a surface laid on top with an arch allowing water to drain to the sides and drain out. That way, if there's rainfall, you don't have water standing up on there. And these roads connected the entire empire. And we even see them today, especially in cities where they're actually still used. Now, they might have been paved over and stuff, but the base layer and stuff has stayed for 2,000 years. Roman bridges were also very important, and because a lot of Roman cities were away from water sources, you needed to transport water from one place to another. And that was the Roman aqueducts. This Roman aqueduct is nearly 2,000 years old, and its job is to bring, it still works today, and you see a lot of them in France and Italy and elsewhere. And some of them still work, and they bring water from lakes and stuff into other areas where you could have water, not clean drinking water for baths and things like that, from areas which don't have a great natural water source to support the population. Now, in terms of Roman architecture, the Romans loved the Greeks. And if you remember, the Greeks created things like columns and stuff. And right here in the middle is the Pantheon, in the middle of Rome. And the Pantheon, as you can see, is a fusion of Roman and Greek ideas. You have Greek ideas in terms of these columns, but the Pantheon right here is actually, up until very recently, over in the past couple hundred years, is the world's largest dome. Over 2,000 years ago, the Romans created the dome. So the idea of like the Superdome in New Orleans or dome stadiums in Europe, Japan, and things like that have their base in Roman architectural and engineering ideas. Another of Rome's accomplishments was that its language was spoken across the empire. And this empire, the language of the empire was Latin. It was the language of the Romans, and it was spoken across the empire. So what could happen was you could have people from Spain to Syria. They had a common language they could speak in, and that was Latin. This led to the development of languages over the years. After the fall of the Roman Empire, these languages morphed slowly but surely in isolated pockets, leading to what we call the Romance languages. No, not romance as in kissing, but romance as in having to do with Rome. And these modern major languages are French, Spanish, Italian, Romansh, Romanian, and Portuguese. And so here's a picture of where Latin was kind of spoken in in Europe during Roman times, and the languages that are still there. So we have Portuguese right here, we have Spanish, we have French, we have Italian right here. Romanian in Eastern Europe is based on Latin, and you have Romansh, which is this little area right here. It's kind of like Italian also, but it's a separate language. And these languages spread later on through civilizations and colonizations in the Western Hemisphere. So all of South America either speaks Spanish or Portuguese, with a little bit of Dutch and English, by the way. And Central America has Spanish, and even the Caribbean with French and English. I'm sorry, French and Spanish, and even in Canada with French. So the Roman language of Latin is spoken these days all around the world. In addition to that, in Africa also through French colonization, as well as Portuguese. So, and finally, an accomplishment that the Romans did was the total system of written laws that they called civil law. Many of these laws, it's the basis of trial by jury and things like that, have survived today in nations across Europe. The French and German and Belgian and Dutch and many other legal codes on continental Europe are based on Roman law. And in the United States, though, we use the English tradition of common law, which for sixth graders, you don't really need to know the difference. But you do need to know this, is that 49 of the 50 states in the United States base common law as their system of law and stuff. But one, the state of Louisiana, is actually based, the law and the way laws are treated and reviewed is based on this Roman law, a civil law, because it was the law of the land in France when Louisiana was colonized. So there you go. It's kind of a long lesson, just to sum things up. Rome was in trouble. Cicero, this guy right here, said that the Senate should be restored its powers. These three guys, Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, formed the triumvirate, an alliance of powerful Roman statesmen to try and save the government. Crassus dies. Pompey and Caesar fight against each other. Pompey dies. Caesar declares himself dictator, and he's then killed. Two allies of Julius Caesar were Mark Antony and Octavian, and they go and they fight against Pompey to try and capture him and bring him to justice. Pompey dies, and then Octavian and Mark Antony squared off against each other, with Octavian becoming victorious. Octavian does not give power back to the Senate. Instead, he becomes emperor, leading to 200 years of peace known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. And in this time, we had the major advancements of the Roman civilization of engineering and architecture and language and law, which leads to roads that we still see today, aqueducts that carry water even today, great architectural masterpieces, and the Romance languages, which are based on the Roman language of Latin that we even use today. So there you go. That's your lesson. As always, please, if you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.